Another thing about Alpine, we can have reusable data. So in order to do this, we can basically set up a Alpine object and use the data function and actually register a specific variable. So in order to do this, so let's actually do this in the script. So let's open some script tags. Now inside those script tags, let's do alpine.data. So we can basically register a variable globally, and we can reuse it inside the different elements. So let's do alpine.data, and then inside this we're going to have the variable that we want to register, which is drop down, and we're going to use the arrow function. And inside this arrow function, we're going to have basically the variable initial value and the functions that basically mutate this variable. So let's make this the drop down is going to be open or false, open, true or false. So we're going to have an open variable, and we're going to set it as false, and then we're going to have a toggle function, and this toggle function will basically toggle this drop down menu to make it open and closed. So when we call this function, all it's going to do is that it's going to set open to equal not open. So if open is true, then it's going to be false. If it's false, it's going to be true. Now we can call this. So we can go in the elements now and call this using just so we can have a div that can use the drop down. So let's make a div inside the body tags. Let's have a div. Let's remove this. We don't need this right now. And let's have a div that uses x data drop down, so we can use this variable. So we can use this data. We'll put in drop down. Actually, we don't need the curly braces. And inside this, we're gonna have a button. And when we click this button, we're going to. So inside this button, let's call it expand. Inside this, let's have expand text. And the button is going to be linked to the toggle function that is available inside the drop down in the alpine.data. So when we click this button, we want it to call the toggle function, which would basically change open to be false and true. And after that, we want to have a span below it, so we can basically check the value of open. So we simply do span x show open. It will only show, the span will only show, so inside the span we'll just have contents inside. So we'll do x show is equal to open. So if it's open, then it will actually show the span, and the content of the span will just put content. And now let's run it. As you can see, if I click on expand, it should show the content. And just to fix this up, the only issue why it wasn't working is that first of all we needed the brackets, and secondly we had to wait for Alpine to first initialize before we can actually use the Alpine variable. So make sure to wrap it inside this event listener, which would basically check if Alpine is initialized. So right over here we'll do document.add event listener, and we will listen for Alpine init, and then we will basically call this arrow function, which will allow us to execute the Alpine code. So now we can paste it right over here, and we can basically now use this. So run it, and then as you can see, when I click expand, then it will call the toggle function, and the toggle function would change the open variable to true, and if it's true, it will change it to false. So now we can use this same paradigm in order to have different drop down menus. So let's copy this div. This sort of div will copy and paste it, so we can have it like another drop down menu. So now let's just basically run this, save it, and run it. Instead of the content, we'll do other content. And now we can save it. And as you can see, now each one is its own. It has its own variable and function. So as you can see, I can basically make them both toggled. This is the cool thing about Alpine, and I can basically make them both false, and they're independent. So each one has its own variable, own open variable, and it will have its own toggle function. and this you can reuse the code. It makes reusing code so efficient. Like it makes your coding very concise. You don't have to keep repeating the code again and again.